my testimony, and why I want to run for Congress. I'm Trey Cole. This is The Trey Cole Show. So on The Trey Cole Show, over the past few weeks, I think this is week 12 now, I've talked a lot about politics and how we as Christians should respond to different events, and just covered some current events. But I want to take some time to talk about what God has done in my life and talk about where I see God leading me. And so I see God leading me to Congress, and I want to talk about why I see that and why I feel that way. But before that, I want to talk about how I've gotten to where I'm at. And so I grew up in Iola. I was born in College Station, but grew up in Iola. Was there till I was 18, and then went to Liberty University. But while I was in Iola, I grew up in the typical kind of country American family. My dad worked away from home, so he would work a few hours away from home, and I'd see him every now and then, just whenever work would allow him to come home. My mom worked at Central Baptist Church, where I go now, and she ran the preschool there. She ran the Mother's Day Out program. And so I grew up in a Christian family. And so when I was 9 years old, I accepted Christ. My sister and I slept in the same room. We had a bunk bed, and what was her room originally, it was a pink wall with like the light up stars on the ceiling. So I accepted Christ on the top bunk of our room when I was 9 years old. And then I didn't get baptized for another 3 years. So I got baptized the day before my first mission trip that I went on to Little Rock, Arkansas. And while I was in Little Rock, I felt God calling me to missions. And so for a long time, that's what I did. I went to Little Rock, Minneapolis, Indianapolis. I went to Virginia 3 times. I went to Honduras once. I've been to El Salvador 3 times. And I've been to Austria once. And so doing that, I really felt like that's where God was calling me when I was in 6th grade. And I feel like he did call me there for a period of time, but I don't think that's where he's calling me anymore. And so when I was in 6th grade, I was baptized the day before my first mission trip and was living life pretty well. Known as the good kid, didn't break the rules, just kind of followed the rules because that's what you were supposed to do, and said all the church answers because that's what you were supposed to say. But that all changed when I was in 8th grade and my friend James K died. So James was one of my best friends growing up. My sister, me, and Ethan, my cousin, were getting off the bus at my house one day. We were walking down the dirt road to get to our house. And James, his grandma was taking him home. And he sees us, and he's like, "Hey, who are those kids? I want to see if they want to come over and we can hang out." And so James's grandma pulls in and goes and talks to my mom. And then from then on out, we would always go over there and hang out with him and play with him. And so we were really good friends. And on the day that he died, we were supposed to have our first basketball game of the season for junior high. But it got canceled because of the varsity. They still had football. And so they needed all the coaches for that. And so on November 15th, James died in a 4-wheeler accident. And when that happened, I was faced with a choice. I was faced with a choice of blame God or don't trust God and see this as something horrible that's happened that shouldn't have happened, that I wish didn't happen. Or I could see it as trusting God, an opportunity to trust God and to lean into him and to know that while I may not understand what's going on, all I can do is say, "God, you are in control. You know more than I do. And so I'm going to choose to trust you, even though it's hard, even though I don't feel like it." And so I chose to trust God in that circumstance. The hardest thing that I had ever gone through at that point was losing my best friend. And so that is when my faith became my own faith. Whenever I started pursuing God because I wanted to pursue God, because I chose to trust him in that. And that was when I truly started developing a true relationship with God. And so then going into high school, I had worked through that. I was working through that. And then basketball happened. So if you know me, you know that I love basketball. I play basketball all the time. I'm a basketball coach. But when I was a sophomore in high school, Iola got a new basketball coach. And this basketball coach and I did not see eye to eye on one very important thing in my life. And so the day before our first district game, my sophomore year of high school, I tell our coach, or I ask my coach if it's okay if I ride home my mom after the game, because I've got a church event going on that day that's going on throughout that weekend. And so I asked him if it was okay if I would ride home with my mom so that she could drop me off on the way back to Iola, because the game was in Snook. So Iola's on the other side of College Station from Snook. So it's an hour-long drive to Snook, an hour-long drive back to Iola, and then 30 minutes to College Station and 30 minutes back to Iola. And that was what my mom was going to have to do. And so I asked him if it was okay if I just rode home with my mom so that she could drop me off on the way home to save her time and gas. And basically he told me that I had done all of my church crap over the summer, and that from November to February was basketball season and that church could wait. And then he told me that if my faith came before basketball, that I needed to get out of his program. And so he said this in front of other people. I know people that said that I was not just hearing things. They have confirmed this when I was there. And so I went and told my mom that, and she told me that the choice was mine. Like, I had to choose whether I was going to put basketball above my faith, or whether I was going to put my faith above basketball and keep it there. And so the next day I went into my coach's office and I told him that I had thought about what he had said, and that if that's the way that he felt, I wasn't going to be in his program anymore. And so I told him that I was going to leave the basketball team because my faith was always going to come before basketball, no matter how much I love playing basketball. Now, obviously, you can't do that as a coach or as a school official. You can't do that. So he ended up getting in trouble with the principal, the vice principal, and I had to talk to them. And then we had like a group meeting, and they convinced me to come back on the team. And so I got back on the team, but from then on out, basically there was no way for me to get playing time. There was no way for me to impress him. He would blame things on me that I didn't have any part in. He would skip over my stats. He would just really try to target me to see if he could get me to react to him. And so throughout the next 2.5 years, I hated basketball. I hated practice. I hated the team, or not the team. I hated being on the team, but I loved my teammates so much. And that was the only reason that I could tolerate being there, was because I was such good friends with them. But it was just such a hard time for me with basketball, because that was something that I wanted to be great at. That was something that I loved to do. And that love for the game had just been taken from me by my coach. And so for that 2.5 years, my coach would not allow me to basically do anything. He would not allow me to contribute in really any way other than bringing the team over and hanging out with them so that we could all be friends. And so that was really hard for me, just because I had such a strong desire to be great at basketball and be really good and improve, but I didn't get to do that. And that was the first time that someone had targeted me for my faith. And so I would go home to my mom crying all the time about how much I hated basketball and how much I just wanted to quit and how I didn't want to be there. But my mom would remind me that she did not raise a quitter, and that I was not going to quit. If I committed to doing it for the year, I was going to commit to doing it for the year. And if I didn't want to play after that, then that was my decision. And so I decided that I was going to keep playing, and I was on the team, and it was not going the way that I wanted it to go. But through that, God was just so faithful to give me opportunities to have conversations with teammates that would ask me why I don't react the way that they do, because I wasn't the only one he disliked. And so some of the other players that he disliked would respond very differently than the way that I did. And they would ask me how I don't respond the way that they do, how I don't yell at them and cuss and walk out and throw the ball, how I respond with his inability to get a rise out of me, how I respond with respect, and why I was able to do that. And so I got to tell them that it was because I knew that I was setting an example for Christ, and I knew that no matter what happened, no matter what he said to me or what he did, at the end of the day, it's just basketball. And it's not going to define my life. And he is not going to define my life, And he is not going to define my impact for Christ or my testimony for Christ. And so I was able to have those conversations with teammates that saw the difference in the way that I responded to that challenge and a similar challenge that they were going through. And so I got a really great opportunity with that. And God worked through that for 2.5 years to show them that when you have Christ, when you are pursuing Christ, you respond differently to adversity. You respond differently to tragedy with James. And so high school was a lot of up and down for me. I had friends, but we didn't really hang out outside of basketball season or outside of school for most of them. But God worked through me in high school, and that's all that I can ask for. And even up until then, I lived a pretty easy life. Like I had lost James, and that was really hard. But people go through more difficult things than not being able to play on your basketball team. And I realized that because I had seen true suffering. I had been to places that were true. The people there were truly suffering and truly had nothing and had to work for everything that they had. And so how can I feel bad for myself because I can't play basketball as much as I want to, or I can't go in the game because as much as I want to? And so I had that perspective. But then when I graduated, I went to Liberty University for 1.5 years in Virginia. And I love Liberty. I love what it stands for. I love what they teach. I love the school. And even just the campus is incredible. But while I was at Liberty, I was in a physically, emotionally, and sexually abusive relationship for 1.5 years. So almost the entirety of the time that I was there, I was in this relationship. And so my mom, my sister, my dad drove me to Virginia, and then we went to DC, and they dropped me off at Liberty on their way home. And on the night that I was dropped off and they left was actually the night that I met this girl. And so she was from Texas. She liked to two-step, which I love to two-step. And so it just made a lot of sense. And then she said she wanted to do mission work, which is what I wanted to do at the time because I didn't know anything about politics. And so I asked her on a date, and we go on a few dates, and then I asked her to be my girlfriend, so we start dating. But when I met her family, one of her parents, I can't remember which one, but one of them told me that it was my job to keep her alive because she was suffering from severe depression and she had suicidal thoughts. And so that first semester for me was a lot of stress. I didn't know how to respond to that, but I wanted to do what I could to make her feel better. So I stopped playing basketball completely. I stopped talking to people. She was the only person that I would really talk to. So I became very isolated. And that is just not a good situation to be in. And so I stopped eating. I stopped playing basketball, and I started spending all of my time with her. And that was just a really unhealthy semester for me, but I hated who I was. I hated the situation that I was in. I hated that her family life was just so difficult for her because her family had a lot of issues, and I felt bad for her. I felt bad for her little brother, who I love. I love her little brother, but I felt bad for them. And so, but I couldn't justify staying in that relationship and putting myself in that position. And for a long time, I blamed myself, and I said that it was my job to stay in this relationship and help her. But eventually I realized when I came back for Christmas break the second year, so after my third semester, I realized that it wasn't on me to be her savior. That wasn't my role. That was God's role. That was the role of Jesus, was to be her savior. And that was something that I couldn't do. I could not fulfill her the way that she was looking to be fulfilled. And so I decided that I was going to break up with her and leave Virginia. I missed my family. I missed being able to see my sister, my mom, and my dad more because I was only seeing them like 2 or 3 times during the semester. And so I decided that I was going to break up with her and then move back to Texas. But I didn't tell anyone that. And so my mom got my dad and I tickets to the bowl game, the Tax Slayer Bowl in Jacksonville for Texas A&M. So my dad and I went, and the plan was we were going to take my truck to Jacksonville. I was going to drop him off in Georgia, and then I was going to drive to Liberty. Well, when we got to Jacksonville, I had decided that I was going to break up with her. My dad doesn't like music, and he doesn't like talking. So we had a 17-hour drive of basically silence where I was driving, and he was sleeping. And God just got a hold of me there, and he showed me that I needed to get out of that relationship no matter what it took. And so I had texted some friends from high school that I hadn't talked to in a while, and I told them everything and really got their encouragement. And one of them was on the A&M football team at the time. And so when we got to Jacksonville, my dad and I went and got lunch with his family, and we got to talk about it and just really he really just helped me process what I needed to do and what the best thing was for me. And I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him. So I'm just so thankful for him and for his friendship. But when my dad and I got to the game, we got there 3 hours early, so the gates weren't open yet. So I told my dad that I need to go to the bathroom. So I walked away and called my girlfriend and broke up with her. I said that the way that we were living was not glorifying to God and that we couldn't continue to do that. I told her that it wasn't a healthy relationship, that we didn't need to be in it, and that I wasn't going to just be complacent in that and be complacent in that sin anymore. So I broke up with her and then went to the game. After the game, no one knew this, that I was even considering this outside of the two friends that I talked to. And so after the game, I told my dad, I was like, "Hey Dad, there's probably something I should tell you." And he said, "What is it?" And I told him that I had broken up with my girlfriend and that I wanted to move back to Texas. And he said, "Well, okay, call your mom." So I called my mom. I told her. Through all of that, I realized that I can't be the one that saves other people. I can't be the one that delivers people from their darkness. That's not my role. That's not our role as Christians. Our role as Christians is to point people to Christ and to show people the only one that can save them, that can bring them out of darkness, and that is Christ. But I also realized that I can't rely on anything except Christ. I can't rely on myself to help other people. I have to rely on Christ, and I have to pursue God. And that was something that I did not do at Liberty. I was not pursuing God at Liberty. And I think that that is one of the biggest reasons as to why I was so complacent and why I was in that relationship for so long. And so I realized that no matter what's going on in life, I have to be pursuing Christ so that I can represent him well, so that I can be the best version of myself that I can be. And so I moved back to Texas, and eventually I met my now roommate Ben, who is now my best friend, and he invited me to work at Pine Cove. So I'd never heard of Pine Cove before, but he said it was a church camp, and I knew that I needed to do something in ministry. And so I applied to Pine Cove, got accepted for Pine Cove, got offered, and my second day at Pine Cove, so I've got 2nd through 5th grade boys. And this week specifically, I had 3rd and 4th grade boys for the cabin that I was in. My second day at Pine Cove, I don't know anyone there except Ben. I don't know any of the counselors really. I'd met them, but I didn't really know them. And we're at lunch on the second day, and I get a call from my mom. And so in order to get in contact with a counselor at Pine Cove, there are like 3 different people you have to go through. So it's got to be an emergency for someone outside of Pine Cove to get in contact with you. And so my camp director came up to me, gave me his phone because we don't have our phones. And he said, "Hey, this is your mom. She said it's important. You need to go talk to her." And so I went out and I talked to her. And when I picked up the phone, she was crying. And she said that she had just found out that my dad had been cheating on her for 7 months with a 21-year-old girl. And so my second day at Pine Cove, my entire world had just fallen apart. I had just found out that my dad was cheating on my mom with a girl that was my age. And I just sat there and cried. And meanwhile, all of the people so we were at lunch, all of the people during lunch are coming out, all the kids, all the counselors, and they see me just sitting by the door crying. And so I tell GetSmart, my camp director, that I have to go back home and I have to tell my sister because my mom told me that she couldn't tell my sister on her own. So I told my camp director that I was going to go home and tell my sister, and I wasn't sure when I was going to be back. And he told me to take my time and to be with my family. And so I went to my cabin, I packed up my clothes, and I was about to leave. But as I was leaving, my kids were outside of my cabin with another counselor. And I could hear them crying. I could hear them asking why I was upset. I could hear them asking where I was going. And so then they open the door and they see me there. And they all just give me a hug and we all start crying together. And I told them that I would be back that night so that I could, every night I go through part of the gospel with my cabin. And so I told them that I would be back that night so that I could go over our little section of the gospel with them and tell them good night. And so I drove 2.5 hours home, and I told my sister with my mom that my dad had been cheating on my mom with a girl that was our age for 7 months. And that's when I found out that that wasn't the first time my dad had cheated on my mom. Apparently he had left us when I was around 10 for another family. And so my whole world fell apart while I was at Pine Cove on my second day there. And I drove back 2.5 hours home that night so that I could see my kids and tell them good night. And then on that Saturday, I drove back to Iola, so back 2.5 hours on my 24 hours off so that I could confront my dad and tell him what I expected to see from him, and so that I could speak for my sister, because my sister wasn't able to really voice her opinion or her frustration. And so I did that. I talked about how he had two major roles as a husband, that he was supposed to be the spiritual leader and he was supposed to love his wife. And we had always given him a pass for being the spiritual leader because that was always my mom. But we did that because he always loved us and he loved his wife so well. But now he is failing both of those, and that wasn't acceptable. And so I laid out some things that I wanted to see him do, and I told him that no matter if he had a relationship with his daughter, his son, or his wife ever again, the only thing that matters is his relationship with God, and that he has one. And that is still true today. It doesn't matter if he has a relationship with us or not. The only thing that matters is his relationship with Christ. And so he didn't take that the way that I was hoping, which it doesn't surprise me, because who wants to be told that by their son? Probably no one. I wouldn't want to be told that by my son. And so I went back to Pine Cove for the next 6 weeks, and I would call them on the weekends. I went home a few weekends. But Pine Cove was one of the biggest reasons that I was able to get through that. Because at Pine Cove, I was able to make relationships with people that I wouldn't have met, and people that pursue God so well. I had never understood the value of community until I went to Pine Cove and saw how much everyone loved each other. Even though a lot of us are very different, we all loved each other so much, and that was because the only thing that we had to have in common was our relationship with Christ. And that was so evident in that moment and in that culture, and I was just so appreciative of that, and it taught me so much and allowed me to get through what I would say was the most difficult time in my life. And so going from there, I don't really see my dad a lot anymore. I don't really talk to him much. I've seen him Thanksgiving, twice in May. Yeah, so I've seen him 3 times in over a year now. And that's really hard working through that. But one thing that I have to remind myself is that no matter what he's done, no matter what he's doing, the only thing that matters is that at some point he turns to Christ and he sees that he has been in the wrong and he repents from that. Because he needs Christ no more than I need Christ. He needs redemption no more than I need redemption. Because I have fallen short of God's glory just like he has. And we do that constantly. And so reminding myself that no matter what he has done, no matter how it has hurt me or affected me or my family, in the eternal perspective, that doesn't matter. All that matters is that he has a relationship with Christ and that he has repented of his sins. And has he done that? I don't think so, but I can't say that for sure. But I have to constantly remind myself that it is not my job to fix him. It is my job to forgive him. And so I have forgiven him. I have moved on from that. And if he was to turn back to God and he was to stop living the lifestyle that he has been, then I would be open to having a relationship with him. But until then, I'm not going to act like I tolerate the way that he has been living his life. And that's because he proclaims to be a Christian. And so if you proclaim to be a Christian, you have a responsibility to live that out. And I have a responsibility to hold you to that standard. And so because of that, that is why I no longer talk to my dad very much. Is because while I want to be there for him and show him that I still love him, I also want to show him that if you're going to claim to be a Christian, I'm going to hold you to a standard. And I'm not going to tolerate that level of just openly living in sin and openly not pursuing God. And so that brings me here, where I am now. It has been a lot to talk about and to process and to go through, but God has just been so faithful through every area of my life to provide for me and to teach me and to lead me. And so no matter what I go through in life, no matter if it's losing someone or it's being told that I can't do something for my faith, whether it's me having to learn the hard way that I can't save people and that I can't be there the way that some people may need me to be there because they need Jesus, or whether it's learning that sometimes you have to distance yourself so that people can see their brokenness and see that they need to turn back to Christ. No matter what it is, I can't control how others act. I can only control how I respond. And every time I want to respond in a way that glorifies Christ. And so that's the biggest thing for me, is seeing that even when there's brokenness in this world, when James died, even when people hate me because of my faith, or people rely on me more than I can help them with, or when people, again, make mistakes that are seen as egregious and that are seen as horrible, I have to forgive them. I have to recenter myself on Christ. And I have to know and remember that everything that I do is for the glory of God, and that I need salvation just like each and every other person. And so that's the biggest thing for me, is reminding myself that I've messed up and I've done wrong and things have been done wrong to me, but I am not a victim because Christ has made me a victor. And that is the biggest thing for me. I have hope in this life, not because of myself, but because of what Christ has done. And so because of that, I want to tell others about what Christ has done in my life and what Christ can do in their life. And for me, I see that as being in Congress. I see God leading me to the federal government, leading me to Congress, and showing people the love of Christ there. Because I see politics as a way to build people up and a way to push people in the right direction in a good way. And right now, our politics is not that at all. Politics is divisive right now. Politics is a war right now. And I hate that. I want to be part of the change in our government. I want people to go back to loving each other and disagreeing on things. It's okay to disagree on things. I have friends that I disagree with a lot. But that doesn't change the fact that we are to show each other love as Christians, no matter if they are for abortion, for free healthcare, or disagree with our policies. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is, just like I told my dad, the only thing that matters is that we have a relationship with Christ. And so that is my drive for going into Congress, is telling people about the love that Christ has for them and showing people the love that I have for them because of Christ. And so that's my heart behind going into Congress, is bridging that divide between both sides of the aisle and showing people that you can love each other. And that is only because of what Christ has done and only because God has loved us first. I'm Trey Cole. This is the Trey Cole Show. So if you like this show, like, share, subscribe, share it specifically. That'd be awesome. And then we will see y'all next Tuesday.